All right, let's go ahead and get this thing started. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And Heather, it is great to see you again. A lot of things have been going on, it seems like, since our last conversation. Congratulations on the new podcast. You want to just give a quick synopsis of what the new podcast is about?
Sure. Yeah. I love doing it so much. It's a podcast called Can I Have a Word with You? And it is me and my friend, author Bruce Pulver. He wrote a book called Above the Chatter, Our Words Matter. And he and I met about a year ago is all. I mean, it's been crazy. We just had our friend anniversary not too long ago, but the connection that we had, because the topics that we talk about and write about, I write about them in my blog posts in Selfie, and he writes about them. He goes through, he has about 365 words in his book, and he does an acrostic to each word. So we kind of just match up our topics, and then so we pick, in every episode is about 20 minutes. We pick one word and we just talk about that one word the whole time. And we don't really do guests or anything right now, because we just unpack the words that we are passionate about talking about, and that seems to fill our time pretty quickly, and we're both doing a lot of other things. So it's been fun. We have, I think, released maybe 8 or 9 episodes, or at least recorded that many. We record a few at a time just for make our lives a little less crazy, but yeah, so it's been fun.
I feel like there's more than that. I feel maybe I'm wrong. I felt like there were at least double digits
for the amount that we've released.
Yeah, maybe I'm talking crazy. I thought, let me look so I don't feel
That's right. You know more than me. I lose track of stuff. I try not to. It sounds bad, and I know this isn't probably a great business plan, but I don't track very much of any of it, because I just.
No, you're totally right. I don't know what I was thinking. You're totally right. I don't know why I had a feeling, because I've listened to several of them, and I don't know why I was thinking that there were more than that. Just, I guess the content's just so good. It felt like I was getting a
or it's like how most people feel with me, like, oh my gosh, that's so many, it's so much.
Oh my god.
Shut up. I think you've been talking for so many episodes.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, in my quick eyeball, I think there's 8 of them there, roughly. So
yeah, there should be one released tomorrow. They come out every Monday at midnight, basically. So every Tuesday morning when you wake up, you should have one.
That's legit. What's been just kind of so far? Well, first of all, I love I love that concept. It's a simple, straightforward concept, but I think it's really, really cool. And you guys have a chance to get into some really, profound stuff by just focusing on one word and unpacking it. And what would you say has been, I'm going to put you on the spot maybe, but your favorite part about doing the podcast so far?
I love to talk about and expand on, or maybe rehash a little bit about what I've already written about, things that have been on my mind. And sometimes I think I don't think I'm the only one who really processes those things, but it's nice to find someone else who can kind of process that out loud with me. And it just kind of re-emphasizes the impact of what those words mean in our life, and the different nuances to it, because we don't plan ahead. We literally just pick 3 or 4 words that we're both maybe have written about in the past, or words that have been on our mind that week, and we just give each other the word and we agree on the word, and that is it. And the rest of it is organic. We don't edit any of it. We record it and we post it, and that's it, because we want it to be very real and raw. And so we and we don't. So sometimes his view of that word is completely a different perspective than mine. And then as we go, sometimes it also changes and different things pop in our head and we discuss those. So by the end, we probably could have a whole second podcast based on this new nuance of the word that we've kind of come to, in talking and dialoguing about it with each other. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Yeah. Yeah, it's so cool. It's really cool. Yeah, those conversations that are just kind of off the cuff and you see what happens and you have a chance to I love what you said there about processing through some of those things with somebody else and kind of knowing that
Mhm.
okay, there's another person on the other side of this that has experience with this as well, or has struggled with this as well, or something like that. And yeah,
Right.
that's really, really cool. I love the authenticity, and the same thing comes across in your books, the way that you write. And we talked a little bit last time you were here about your books, Soul Selfie, and then Soul Selfie hashtag no filter. Is it no filter or no filters? I just
No filter.
no
Yeah.
filter. Okay, that's what I thought.
Well,
I just
really, I mean,
wasn't sure if there was an S on the end or not. But anyway,
yeah.
yeah, and that's just kind of it's it came across last time you were on the podcast. It's come across every time that we've had a conversation together. Just kind of that realness and that authenticity of who you are, where you're not afraid to hold things back, and you're just so good at presenting the real picture, even if it kind of puts you in a light where people can see your flaws or your mistakes or something like that. And I think
Mhm.
that that's really good because it lends to authenticity, always lends to, I think, trust and belief. And so people can kind of
Mhm.
get behind that in a way that says, you know what, I can actually learn from this person. And so I think that that's really cool. I wanted to just ask you before we move on from this, has there been one episode or one word in particular that you've either really enjoyed unpacking, or on the other side that was kind of particularly challenging for you to unpack?
Um, I don't know that I have any specific ones that were my favorites. The ones we started off with were words that we both either struggle with or talk
Mm,
about repeatedly in our writing, and for me, particularly in, with my blog. But so the first ones were like control. We did a lot of C words actually. We had like control, change, contentment,
mhm.
comparison, comfort,
Yeah.
and those are definitely repeat themes for me. The control issues, for sure. I think I might have mentioned when we did our talk last time that when my husband was proofreading my book when it came out, it's really designed as a daily reading type of book.
Mhm.
But he had, to edit it, you kind of sit down and read it all in a couple days time. And he finished it, and I said, how was it? And he's like, good. I did not realize that you have some pretty consistent control issues because
Control
like
freak.
every other post is about control, and I'm
Mhm.
like, yes, that would probably be true. So I think those are good ones for me to unpack because they are pretty consistent themes for me. The
Mm.
control issues and comparison, man, that's a big one for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we
Doing
definitely talked.
podcasts with people, it's so hard to not compare. Even with Bruce, who I adore, I'm like, man, I feel like any day he's going to cancel me, like, because he's
It's
going
gonna
to say like
cancel.
he's way too, he's up here and I'm just like this little lowly person on his
Oh,
coattails
stop it.
kind of thing. I want to do one on cancel. That would be a good
Cancel.
word.
Cancel culture, like two
Canceled.
C's.
Mm. You got to be careful on that one since we don't edit them.
Yeah.
You got to be careful what you say. But I feel like that would be a really good thing to
Mhm.
unpack. Cancel.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that's a big deal in our society today, for sure. A lot of people
Mhm.
would resonate with that one.
Yeah.
Well, just one more time, mention the name of the podcast and where people can find it, just in case we forget to do that later.
Yes, it's called "Can I Have a Word with You," and it is on the best places I think, and easiest places to find it would probably be on Anchor or Spotify. I think those are the main two.
Mhm. Very cool.
So yeah, pretty easy to find. They come
Very
out
cool.
every Tuesday.
Every Tuesday. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, very good. Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing about that. I'm pumped about it, and I'm glad that you guys got it launched and off the ground. And yeah, I'm excited for where it's going to go. It's super cool.
Good. Thanks.
I guess is there any fear that eventually you run? I guess there's no fear that you would eventually run out of words, right? Like there's so many.
Mhm.
Well, you said he's already
No
got so
fear.
many on reserve, and
Yeah.
yeah, pretty
No,
limitless
no
supply
fear
of
whatsoever. If
words in the
anything,
world.
like
Yeah,
I feel like we could do one every day. There's just so many,
yeah,
but the way our brains work too, every word someone says, I think, oh man, that could be a podcast.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
got lots
Love
of
it.
words.
And last time you were here, we did spend some time talking about control, and we talked about some of these things, and really a lot of what you kind of divulge in your books, in your writing, is your own experiences with what you call plagues of the heart. And
Mhm.
again, you do that in a very authentic way, where you talk about your own struggles, and then struggles and victories, I think, and just experiences in
Mhm.
general, right? But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about last time you were here that we didn't really, I don't think we mentioned, I don't think we had any chance to, we just didn't have the time to get into it. I wanted to talk to you about triggers. That was one of the things that I read about
Mhm.
in your most recent of the two books. You talk about
Mhm.
triggers. And so, yeah, we'll see where we go from here. But I wanted to just kind of jump off there and see if we can spend a little bit of time talking about specifically triggers. And so, if we could, just as we start off, how do you look at what is a trigger? How do you define that kind of in your own words?
Well, I was kind of looking up my post that I wrote about this called Trigger Happy.
Mm,
And I sometimes I write things and I'm like, I don't remember that I'm like, that's pretty good. So I'm just gonna read the definition of that because I thought that is something I need to actually remind myself of. I said a trigger is anything that diverts me from where I am intending to go and gets me all turned around sideways and lost in a bad part of my mind that is not safe to go alone.
mm,
And sometimes the triggers are things I know are coming. Like, for example, today actually is my 30-year wedding anniversary.
what?
And that,
Congratulations.
yeah, that can be a good trigger, but can also be trigger some, 30 years. I said to my husband, we need a shirt today that just says, we made it. Because
Hmm.
that's sometimes about all you can celebrate. I mean, we have a great marriage, but we've been through a lot of hard stuff. And so it can be a day that I can choose to let it trigger some beautiful memories. It can also be a time where I might think through some of the hard stuff we've been through, and that
Mm,
could trigger some emotions in me that I could make me sad or emotional.
sure.
So there's a lot of things in life like that. And there's another blog I wrote one time called Smells Ring Bells,
Hmm.
and just about how smells can trigger
Yeah.
um, memories and times of our life. I remember I had just started a job at a construction company as the secretary, and they showed me around and they took me into the woodworking room, and there was sawdust smell in there, and I started crying. And that's just a great thing to do on your first day of work, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, but
I did that on my first day of school. I was
you
like
did.
5 though. I wouldn't let
Yeah,
my mom leave.
I was
That's like one of
35.
my first, like, most vivid memories was, like, me in school, like, not letting my mom leave and crying. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was me. That's how my life
Well,
started. Anyway.
it was because my grandfather used to own a cabinet shop, and my grandfather has passed, but we hung out a lot in there and played and helped him at his office and stuff and smelled that sawdust. And so that sawdust smell really triggered these
Mm,
memories of my grandpa and his
mm,
passing and stuff. So there's so many in our life of these triggers that come along, and we have we have choices about how we handle those.
Yeah. What are some of, like, the really common triggers in terms of in general, right? Like, there might be a specific form of one of these things that would, set somebody off, but what would you say are some of the common things, just to give some examples of what might, be something that would trigger somebody to respond emotionally in a negative sense?
Hmm. Well, I do, like I said, it definitely smells, at least for me. And that smells ring bells actually was an article I had read about how those things, springtime, or, balsam
Mhm.
candles make you feel like feelings of Christmas, and however you feel about
True.
Christmas time, that kind of thing. And then our memories associated with those times.
Mm.
For me, sometimes it's just people. You know, the other day, actually, I have a really good example for us. My husband and I went to a small town to just kind of do something fun on the weekend, something different. And as we started walking down the street, we could see a group of people there, and they were people that used to be our friends and aren't anymore. And there was some pretty painful stuff associated with those people, and we just had to kind of walk right by. And man, that easily, a couple years ago, if that would have happened, it would have hijacked my whole day. And
Mm.
the feelings and the anger and the resentments would have come flooding in, and I probably would have been mad at my husband for the rest of the day because of those memories and all this stuff. And we both acknowledged it, and we just kind of gave it to God and kept, and said a prayer. One of the prayers I pray for people, granted, this takes some time to get to this place. So I'm not definitely, I used to pray things like, God, let him go to
Sure.
heaven tonight, kind of thing. That was the prayer. But
Like those
um,
Davidic prayers, yeah.
yes, kind of a lot of prayers from the Psalms, like God smiting people and things like
Mhm.
that. I used to pray more of those kind of prayers, but when I'm spiritually fit and connected to God in a better way, I pray that God gives them all the good things in their life that I want in mine,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is really hard to do because sometimes
Yeah.
it's not true. I want them to suffer. I want them to lose their job and their
Mhm.
house and their and all of it, and I want them to get fat and whatever. I want bad things for them. And
Get
so
that. I want them to go to their high school reunion and get booed or like
yeah, yeah, some
Yeah.
really,
D
really mature thoughts, but
yeah. Mhm, very Christian
yes,
thoughts.
exactly. So we are in a better place now that we've have some tools that we use to get us through some of those other kinds of triggers. So we don't have to be sad for 3 or 4 days or let it hijack our afternoon together. You know,
Mhm.
we got to give those things to God and trust that He has a plan in it all. And it's
Yeah.
simple, but not easy to do.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that one specifically a little bit. So with people,
Mhm.
so if you've got people in your life that, because for some people it could be as simple as just hearing the person's name, in conversation, somebody they might not even be talking about that Emily, but you hear the name Emily come up or in Emily on
Mhm.
TV, and it just kind of like sets you off in your brain because this person named Emily 87 years ago, did
Right.
whatever to you, and there's this negative, memory that triggers your emotions, right? So
Mhm.
specifically on that one, when we're dealing with people, there's a person in your life or that used to be in your life that is you understand that this person is somehow connected to something negative and it's setting you off in
Mhm.
some way. So what would you say, you mentioned being intentional about praying for that person in a way that's
Mhm.
not evil, but but that's seeking their good.
Not evil
Would you
prayers.
is that a good first step, or would you say that there's some other things involved in there? Like, what are some steps that you can take to kind of start to experience freedom in that area?
Well, yeah, definitely praying for them. In fact, it's from the big book of AA, and they talk about, it was a pastor, actually. Someone was saying, I resent this person. And he said, okay, I want you to, actually, they weren't even using that word. They were like, I
Mhm.
hate this person. They said, um, the pastor told this person to pray for them every day, that God gives them all the good things in their life that you want in yours. And so he said, every day for the next 30 days, I want you to pray that prayer. And so he did, prayed it, prayed it, prayed it, prayed it. And he said, by the end of the 30 days, he didn't have those hateful feelings anymore. And that person actually ended up buying a house and living next door to him. Um, and so he's like, imagine if I would have hated this person, and
Yeah.
now he's living next door to me. And by the time that happened, God had changed his heart on the matter. And that's really
Mm.
the best. I think the triggers, and then in my post where I talk about being trigger happy, it's that instead of seeing these triggers as triggering painful, bad things, we can be trigger happy in that we know that it turns us back to God.
Mm.
It triggers us to look at how God sees people. It triggers us to surrender the situation to him, triggers us to turn it over and let him exact the punishment if that needs to happen. You look at Joseph. I read a terrible book. Oh, it was a good book, but terribly annoying book. One of those kind you want to throw across the room a lot, called Total
Yeah.
Forgiveness. And it's the story of Joseph and how he not only did he have to uh, continuously forgive his brothers, but
Mm.
and that we need to do that, but you have to not let other people know what they did, and you have to keep that up for the rest of your life. Like, it's not just enough to forgive them.
Right.
You don't talk about it to everybody. You don't let everyone else know how you've
Yeah.
forgiven this X situation, that you don't talk about it. And I'll tell you, I had a lot of situations that had been boiling inside of me for a long time when I got leukemia, which is what triggered me writing my blog posts. And there were some people that I thought, I can't tell you how many times I thought, all I have to do is drop the name. I mean, I'm writing a blog and there are 20,000 people reading this to pray for me. All I have to do is drop that name, and like, I'll be, vindicated from
Mm.
these things these
Right.
people have done to
Right.
me. I can use names and I can like get vengeance or whatever. And I,
Mhm.
of course, never did it. And I prayed a lot as I was writing, because I wanted to be able to write about it, because that's important for me to process and it's important for other people to hear it. But I was very cautious to never get so close to describing it that anybody could figure out
Mm.
who I was talking about or what
Right.
specific event I was talking about, because that is not God. That's not godly. It's not
Mhm.
what I'm setting out to do. It was very tempting, I'll tell you that. But I
Sure. Yeah.
try very hard not to do that, because that's not good for anybody, and that's not what, God loves those people too. I don't understand how sometimes, but that's not my problem. People probably don't
Right.
understand how he loves me the way he does either. So,
Yeah, it's yeah, when if we're really going to forgive, it's like you said, it's giving up that right that you have, it's and from a human standpoint, you're justified in
mhm,
holding on to that resentment and that anger and that bitterness, and you'd be
mhm,
justified to an extent. We could find ways to justify putting that person down or letting everybody know this is what this person did, or this is who this person really is, or whatever.
mhm.
And we can find justification, and we can find people to come around us and pat us on the back and stroke our ego and say, oh yeah, you
Yeah.
did the right thing. And we can feel good for a season, um about taking matters into our own hands, so to speak. But real
Mhm.
forgiveness is letting go of any kind of a right that you think you have, to hold that thing against them any longer. Because what you're saying is, to forgive somebody, you're saying, I release you from the penalty of what you did wrong to me. And this becomes tricky when we start talking about, really sinister things, terrible things that people have done. This is where, people start to have a problem. Well, like, no, I can't forgive. I can't let this go because what they did is not okay. And I agree with you 100%. What they did is not okay. Like, to say that I forgive you is not me putting my stamp of approval on what you did. It's saying what you did was actually really not okay. But because of who I am and because of what God's done in my life and the forgiveness that I've received, I'm choosing to respond this way because love trumps this. Love trumps hate. Love trumps, resentment. Love trumps this thing that you did to me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that holding on to those things, though, it's, again, it comes back to, I think, that issue of control that we talked about last time, where it gives us this kind of sense of, it helps our pride feel good, which is negative. Like, that's not a good thing, but it helps us feel good in a negative sense. And that's why it can be so hard to get rid of that, and again, we
Yeah.
can really feel justified by holding on to those things.
Yeah. It is. It's one of the other posts I remember writing is called turbo resentments. So those are like the extra big resentments.
Yeah.
And the reason that I had it was the same thing, kind of that trigger. I'm a realtor, so I'm driving, showing houses, and I drove into this small town, and a couple people that had hurt me live in this town. And I remember thinking, as I was driving around, I'm like, I hate this town. Why would anyone want to live in this town? The people in this town are pretty terrible. I'm just bashing the whole town because of these people that lived in this town. I'm like, okay, that's a pretty serious resentment when you're holding a whole town responsible for like two people's maybe selfish behavior. And then I called my husband and I told him this, and he's like, you may have a problem with resentment. I'm like, oh, you
Wow.
figured that out? That's helpful. And then about 2 seconds later, a car drove by, and I was like, oh, I won't tell you what kind of car it was, but I was like, I hate that car. Not only do I hate that town, I hate that car because they drove that kind of a car. So I'm like, all right, I'm holding a town and all brands, all cars like that responsible, for these people's behavior. That's a
Yeah.
pretty serious
Yeah.
problem. So
Yeah.
I write a lot about forgiveness and resentment and all that good stuff because we're all presented with opportunities to be resentful every day. And I know that that's a big block that gets in the way of me being connected to God. And that's really what it comes down to, is like the forgiveness is no favor. I'm not doing it for anyone but myself, and so that I can be, and for God, so that we can have that connection without anything in between. If I hate your kids and start talking bad about your kids and I hate them, how are you and I going to be able to be close? Because I can't stand your kids. And that's kind of what it's like with God. It's like I am telling him, I know you created them, and I know they're kids, but they're really obnoxious kids, and I don't even want to be around them. I can't stand them. Like, how is that going to create intimacy with me and God? And so I don't want to put things in the way that will block that intimacy, even if it is justified. Like, it's not worth it to me. It's not worth the baggage and the carrying all that heaviness around to hold on to that resentment. It's not, and it's not an option. It's just not an option. God says, forgive how I forgave you unconditionally. It's like a non-negotiable thing. It's just a matter of how and when are you going to do it, not if. It's not an option if you're a Christian person. And it's not beneficial, even if you're not a Christian, it's not beneficial to hold on to that resentment either. It makes people sick.
Yeah. Yeah, when you do it, it actually, it's it's a very practical way that we represent the Father. You know, we represent
Mhm.
the love of the Father when we forgive because it's what he did for us.
Mhm.
And as you were explaining that about holding the town responsible for these two people, and
Mhm.
I can't even look at that make or model of car because of this. I just had this kind of picture in my mind of the way that resentments and bitterness and unforgiveness and these things can really start to erode the fabric of your life. Like if you
Mhm.
think about, this is the territory of my mind, and little by little, because of these things that I'm refusing to let go, like there's a whole town I can't even go to anymore. There's a
Right.
whole group of cars I don't even like. I'd never buy that kind of car. And then maybe like those things start to kind of filter their way into other areas, and so I'm losing like territory of where I can actually experience joy in life. And
Yeah.
so
You're
what you
held
said there
hostage.
about held hostage?
Yeah.
Yeah, like what you were saying there about, um, it being for me, like it really being like when I forgive, I'm making a choice to stop myself from being held back because I need to experience freedom. God wants me to experience freedom in my life, and me refusing to forgive somebody or hold something against somebody, like ultimately, what is that doing to that person? It's really it's affecting me. It's affecting my mind, and it's really
Mhm.
robbing me of so much of the goodness that God really wants to that God wants
Mhm.
me to enjoy and have access to, you know?
Yeah, there's so many triggers again that we can, if we don't surrender them to God, and we can do like what I was saying, they hold us hostage, so we can't experience life to the fullest, either emotionally or even physically. I mean, this is so embarrassing. I can't even believe I'm going to tell you this
Mm,
story, but I I went through a period, and it's probably just alleviated in the last year or so, where every building or store or restaurant I went into, my first thing I did was scan the room.
mm,
Is there anybody unsafe here that and I have left Target, I have left places that I needed to go to because I saw a person that was
mm,
scary to me.
okay.
And one time I went to a restaurant, and I was picking up food. And as I walked in, I could see a couple people over here eating together that were scary people in my mind. And so that I had resentments about. And the people, I was up front, and I said, I have an order for Heather. I'm kind of hiding behind this sign so they can't see me. Like, they aren't thinking about me at all. That's the other thing. The other people are
Right.
not thinking about you. You are the only one worrying
Yeah.
about this situation. And they probably didn't notice me because guess what? They're not looking around for scary people. I am. So they say your soup is ready and you'll have to go to the back and pick it up. And I'm like, I can't do that. They're like, but that's where you pick it up. I'm like, well, you're gonna have to bring it up here because I wasn't gonna walk past those people. So I
Yeah.
like made them hand it to me, and then I just kind of took my soup and ran out the door. And like I wouldn't even go pick it up where I was supposed to because I didn't want to see
Yeah.
them. And that's, my counselor's like, Heather, you're held hostage by all these resentments. They're not holding you hostage.
Mm,
You are allowing this unforgiveness and bitterness
yes.
to control your freedom. I couldn't freely go around the city where I live without worrying about who I would see. And that's a terrible feeling. And it's
Mm,
embarrassing to admit that, but I did, and I worked through it. We went through some really hard stuff in our town, and most people who probably go through that move away, and we didn't. We stayed, and I'm so grateful because I have a lot of friends who move away when that kind of thing happens, and then they live with that rooted
yeah.
resentment down in there. But for me, I had to face it day in and day out until I could let it go. And I do feel
Mm,
like I've let it go. I didn't run away when I saw those people sitting outside. I didn't force my husband to turn around and go a different direction, which is exactly what I would have done a couple years ago. Was like, we are going back, we're hiding. And I'm like, we're not hiding.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
it's
Come
gonna
on.
walk past.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
You brought up another really important issue, which is, when we start talking about these issues, these plagues of the heart, as you call them,
Mm,
we start talking about these things. Like I could, if I want to avoid this person or this situation that reminds me of something, that triggers negative emotions in my life or that causes me to act erratically or whatever it might be. So I want to avoid this. So maybe I need to change my job. Maybe I need
mm,
to move to another city.
mm.
Maybe I need to sell the car that reminds me of that thing, or and I can do things to get the thing out of my life. And I think that in extreme cases there's probably a place for that, right?
Yeah.
But if all I'm doing is changing my surroundings, but I'm not dealing with the issue of the heart, eventually that thing, because that root of it is still there, right? So if I'm just clipping the branches, basically, I'm clipping the leaves off, changing what it looks like on the outside, but I'm not dealing with the root. Eventually that thing is going to pop back up somewhere else, right? Like there's going to be something else that either reminds me of it or it's going to come out in some other kind of a way. Would you say that that's
Yeah.
accurate?
Yeah. And I think that when you let those things fester, they, kind of like the disease of addiction, like it's progressive. It's all progressive. And unless you address it, it just grows and grows and grows and gets darker and deeper and has its hold on you more and more.
Mm,
So
yeah.
you may not know exactly where it came from, but think about that all the time. People act in ways that are um, vengeful or rageful or cruel because of how they were, something that happened to them when they were a little kid, or something
Hmm.
their parents did. So there are deep seated things in there. We can't, just because you move out of your house doesn't mean that you don't have issues with parents. And
Hmm.
so, it's with everyone else, it's the same thing. Like, it's not recovery by relocation. That doesn't always work. Sometimes you do need to
Mhm.
change your people, places, and things, but that you still have to address those root issues in your heart so you
Yes.
don't,
Yeah, and I
not
would say
go.
maybe make an adjustment there, like on the people's places and things, as you said, so that you could kind of be in a little bit more of a free space where you can focus more on yourself. But then when you're in that sort of safer space or more, comfortable environment, then still got to deal with it, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe that just kind of puts you in a place where you're a little bit more capable of working through that thing or dealing with that thing. But yeah, but it still has to be dealt with because
Yeah.
as you said, it's not just gonna, it could sit there, lie dormant for a while, so to speak, and
Mhm.
eventually come out in an even more explosive way because it's really just kind of been sitting there festering and you've just been ignoring it.
Right. And we
Yeah.
tend to create lenses. So sometimes we makes us skeptical of other people because of unresolved things with previous friendships. We see that especially in like romantic relationships. You have a bad experience with this person, so you kind of project it onto the next person and the next person and the next
Mm,
person instead of getting to the bottom of why maybe that happened with that specific situation. Just
yeah.
like they say, wherever you go, there you are. You can go wherever you want, but you
Yeah.
still got you to deal with.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's like when you're on your job, just as an example, your job, and everything's bad and everything's bad and it's frustrating, and so you just leave. Then you go to your new job and you find out that the problems are still there. So you leave that job and you go to another job and you find out they still have the problems. At some point you got to recognize maybe you're the problem, or maybe you're not the problem, but maybe these problems exist everywhere and you've got to learn how to deal with them. Or maybe I think that there's something real. This is something we would talk about in ministry, and like in church settings a lot, where, you know, a lot of people, they leave churches because they've experienced some kind of you know, we call it church hurt. They've been wounded by leadership or by people, or, you know, whatever happened. And so if there's some kind of a wound there that's not dealt with, I'm going to leave this church because the spirit's not right. And so I go somewhere else. And what I don't realize is that I'm taking that thing that's in me. And I'm not saying, you know, if you were, you know, mistreated or something like that, I'm not condoning that either. But I'm just saying, like, there's something there that needs to be dealt with. Otherwise, you're going to take that with you into the new place, and you're going to be kind of like what you said, like in that mindset of walking around scanning the stores, scanning the environment. Like, you're going to have that kind of like a suspicious spirit, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, where you're kind of like judging people, and because it's all flowing from, you know, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. Out of the heart, in Proverbs 4, out of the heart flow the issues of life, or spring the issues of life. We live out of what we have in our heart. And so if I've got this issue of bitterness, resentment, or whatever, that thing is always going to fester there until I deal with it, and it's going to begin to express itself in other ways. And so I'm going to start putting things on other people, other churches, other jobs, other families, whatever. I'm going to start putting things on people, and not just holding myself hostage, now holding other people hostage to this thing that's going on the inside of me, even though, you know, they had nothing to do with it.
Oh man, I love that. And I like how you talked about, you know, when we get that kind of a lens or that perspective, then it's like you come in, instead of scanning the room for the fruits of the spirit, for people who are for love, joy, peace, patience,
Yeah.
kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, faithfulness. We scan the room for suspicious people and untrustworthy people, and you tend to find what you're looking for. You know, if you're always looking for that, you're going to find that. But if you train your brain to look for the good things, you're going to find those too. And you see that, like you said, people who hop churches or relationships or whatever, you're looking to catch people doing the wrong stuff instead of looking for the beauty inside people. You know, tend to find what you're looking for.
Good. That's so good. Yes, that's so true.
I
You
love that.
mentioned before, when you were talking about going into that particular town and having those thoughts of, oh, this town is the worst, I hate this place, because of, you know, some people that were there, right? Were you cognizant at the beginning of why like were you aware in your mind of, I hate this town because of these people? Or was that just kind of something that was happening in your mind? Like, do you get what I'm saying there? Like, were
Yeah.
you
No,
were you
I
aware in
was
the moment
very
that it
aware.
was your hate for those people, or,
Yeah.
you know, whatever it was, resentment for those people, that was fueling you to, you know, have that negative response to the town itself?
No, I was pretty aware because I knew I had to. I remember it was the first time I had to show houses in that town, and I was already like I was pre-triggered, you know.
Yeah.
Even
Okay.
as I was pulling into town, I'm like, oh, why are you making me do this? And I think that is, you know, we all connect with God when things are going well. We're like, oh, thank you, God. But you know, I'm very intimately intertwined with God when things are hard. And so if I can use these times of these pain points and these triggers, instead of seeing them as negative and fearing them, I can use it as an opportunity to surrender something to God and draw closer to him. And so in
Wow.
that way, those triggers become opportunities to just build on that relationship and let him create a track record of taking care of me and taking care of my soul. You know, even in all those hard things, I don't want to do them again, mind you. But I also know that I wouldn't have the new friends I have if it weren't for losing some of those old friendships. I wouldn't have the different perspective on life if I was still doing my life the way it was a few years ago. Even though it was really hard to lose it, um, I found some things that were better in many, many ways. And I like the person I am better now. You know, my sense of justice definitely can get in there and still make me mad about all of that. But really, I see that those things had to happen in order for God to, like, you know, even with my leukemia, I remember, I think I mentioned last time, my sister-in-law said, it's like God used cancer to root out a cancer in you that has nothing to do with cancer. And I think he got rid of a lot of cancers in my life and rooted out some things that I would have never been willing to just let go of, and he had to take them because they just needed to go.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not always fun, but it's sometimes necessary, and in hindsight is better. It's better.
Mm. Yeah. That's really profound about, taking those things that do trigger you and allowing
Mhm.
them to become kind of a meeting place, or, with God, allowing those negative things to become a catalyst for communion with God, or a catalyst for intimacy, or even just to have a conversation with God about it, instead of just is that what you mean by trigger happy, or is that something else?
Mhm.
Is that kind
Yep.
of that process of shifting from this thing is affecting me negatively emotionally, and this is my response? Because I think a trigger generally leads to a response. And so if
Mhm.
I come under a certain kind of pressure or stress or something like that, it might lead me to just get into, fear, and get into a pity party. It might lead me to go to the kitchen and grab some cookies and, grab some cake and ice cream, and,
Mhm.
it might lead me to do that. It might lead me to Amazon, where I'm going to go buy a bunch of stuff that I don't need because it makes me feel good. It might lead me to call somebody up on the phone and to talk bad about like all these negative things. um, but to kind of go through that process of recognizing that and really what that is it's a reward. It's I'm getting this trigger, and so there's this, I'm kind of rewarding myself with something that's going to make me feel temporarily good, or it might not even make me feel good, but like I'm in control, right?
Mhm.
Which is its own kind of sadistic feeling of good sometimes, I think. But yeah, so that process, if you could talk about that, of moving from, the things that trigger us to becoming trigger happy. That's really profound, if you could
Mhm.
elaborate on that.
Well, I've I've had a lot of hard things happen over the past few years, and I've had to learn to do that, to let those things trigger me turning to God. And I don't do that perfectly, and I don't always do that right away. I feel like as I learn and grow, that the space between the trigger and all that nonsense until I figure
Mhm.
out, oh yeah, I forgot. You know, I can surrender this to God and move on and say a prayer for them and all that. Like the space is shrinking, which is good. It used to just be, you know, days, hours, days, whatever, and a lot of other um, quick fixes, like, oh, I'm just going to have a glass
Yeah.
of wine, or I'm just going to have some
Mhm.
ice cream, or I'm going to do something. I'm going to watch some Netflix and pretend it didn't happen. Um,
Right.
I did a lot of that first, and then I'd eventually come to this place of surrender. And so now I feel like the space between when that happens is shrinking at least.
Mm.
You know, sometimes is
Right.
progress, not perfection. You know,
Yes.
but the reality is we grow most in hard things.
Mhm.
That's just the truth of it. You know, anybody I talk to who has started a podcast or written a book or whatever, it's usually not just because their life's so amazing and they have to talk about it. It's that
Mhm.
something hard has happened. They've lost a job, or they've lost a child, or they've lost a relationship, or they've lost their health, and they've surrendered it to God in some way, and they want to share it with someone else. But it usually comes from
Mm.
something pretty challenging, pretty difficult.
Yeah.
I know all the things that I've done have been a result of really painful things.
Mhm. Yeah. And so you take the I guess, to move from the pain point to where it can eventually become something that, you mentioned that, with, I don't know if you wanna use this example or something else, whatever works for you, but you talked about that example of,
I have
moving
so
from
many examples,
avoiding
so
right? Of just avoiding certain people that, you'd see in the store or something like that, and it would just kinda cause you to think like, "Oh, this might be an unsafe situation," and so avoiding things where you eventually moved beyond that to where you're able to, um, be there without having to run away,
Mhm.
right? You're able to live your life. You're able to, experience freedom in that area. So yeah, like I guess just if you could give an example maybe of like what it looks like to go from this thing is negatively affecting me every time I smell this thing or every time I go to this place or hear this mentioned or whatever, it's triggering me in a negative way. So how do I begin to take that negative thing and eventually replace it or get to the point where it's not causing me to respond negatively, but where I can actually still be okay when it
Mhm.
happens.
Yeah, and I think that's what redemption is about. Sometimes we have to be intentional about how we redeem places. Maybe there's well, here's one example. It's probably not specific to just me, but I don't know if I mentioned in our other time together that my sister and my brother were in a car accident about 10 years ago,
Mm,
approximately. And both of their kids were in the back seat. They were 8 years old, and they both had put their shoulder harnesses behind their back because they were sleeping. They were traveling to my grandma's funeral, actually, in Idaho,
wow.
and they got run off the road. And
Wow.
both of the kids severed their spinal columns when they impacted. And so my
Whoa.
brother's son and my sister's son are both paralyzed from the waist down.
Wow.
And that happened on Good Friday.
Hmm.
And so for years, we grieved. I mean, we would we knew that was coming. We knew that was going to be a trigger, and
Right.
we were fearing and uh, the upcoming Good Friday. Had nothing in our minds anymore to do with Jesus or anything. It was just like that was the day that this terrible, terrible thing happened. And a few years ago, I remember talking to my sister, and it was like maybe the day before, and I was saying, how are you doing? Are you scared for tomorrow? And she finally was
Mhm.
like, you know what? No, I decided we're not going to grieve that anymore. Like
Mm.
we're going to see it different now. We're going to celebrate that they're still alive. We're going to celebrate that they have, their brains are working properly, that we have a full life. It's just not how we intended it to be or dreamed it would be, but we're going to celebrate it from now on.
Wow.
We're not going to
Yeah.
choose to do that. And so I think sometimes we
Wow.
just have to choose to redeem it. Like I need to choose to pray a blessing on that town when I go through it.
Mm.
And I need to choose to not live in fear, but to pray for the people. Like, another example is I think also being open to God changing you. Like he can only you might not be willing, but you can pray to be that God make you willing to be willing. Like for a
Yeah.
long time I wasn't willing at
Yes.
all to forgive those people, but after a while I was like, God, I'm not willing, but I'm open to you making me willing to be willing.
Uh-huh.
And then that was like the next stage. And then after a while, um, I I did actually have a list of people that I was like, I'm never talking to these people again. Period.
Mm.
Never again. And then after a while, that list became Like, well, if it came up and I ran into them, maybe I would actually talk to them. And so I remember very clearly praying. You got to be careful what you pray for too, because I said,
Mhm.
all right, God, this specific person, she's like borderline. So I feel like I'm willing to be willing. If it should, the opportunity present itself in your time and I see her, I'm willing to say make some sort of amends, or at least, and by that I mean like not walk right past her, but like
Yeah.
speak. So as God would have it, the next day I was going for a walk in the park, and who should be walking right at me but this person and her husband. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was with my husband, and I was doing the like, turn around, let's turn around, let's go the other way. And he's like, we are not doing that.
Wow.
So we walked past them. They didn't recognize us. So I was like, okay, I'm off the hook. Well, I realized we're like in a loop situation. So we're going to pass them again. And that was when I was trying to talk my husband into like taking a side street, and he's like,
Mhm.
Heather, we are not running. We are not doing that. So as we came upon them again, they recognized us, and we stopped and talked for probably 20 minutes.
Mm.
And it was as if nothing had ever happened, which in some ways obviously bothered me because I wanted, like I imagined this apology or something, but we just
Right.
had a
Right.
conversation and we moved on, and that was that. And I thought it was so huge just to not run. And now if I see her, I don't have to have that fear. I don't have, when I hear her name, I don't like turn inside out and cringe. It's just like nothing. It just was
Yeah.
like a pressure valve,
Yeah.
relieved that angst. So because I was willing to be willing, and
Yes.
it doesn't happen overnight for sure. And our feelings don't have to match it necessarily. Sometimes we just gotta act as if until our feelings catch up with our actions, you know?
Mm. Man, you know, I first of all, thank you for sharing, um, both of those stories, and, it really kinda shows the spectrum of how this stuff works. On the one hand, you have
Mhm.
something so devastating as, being in this horrible accident where your children are paralyzed. And then on the other hand, we have a story of some people in your life that treated you wrongly, and how it affects you, negatively, and all of that. And so these things show up, or can show up, in so many different areas. And what you're saying there about willingness is, I really think it's really so profound, because you mentioned before, you said progress, not perfection. And we have to
Mhm.
remember that there's a process for these things. And I don't think, it kind of reminds me of the guy who said to Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief.
Mhm.
There was this willingness to get beyond his unbelief, but there was also this recognition, or this honesty, of the fact that, like, I don't believe everything. Like, I don't believe fully.
Mhm.
I believe in part. I believe
Yeah.
some stuff. I don't necessarily believe this, but I'm willing to, put my
Mhm.
preconceived ideas or thoughts or whatever aside,
Mhm.
so that you can impact my life in this way. And I really do think that God honors that. I
Mhm.
think that what God has a hard time with is the hardness of heart that says, I refuse to forgive this person. I
Mhm.
refuse to let this go. I think that that's where we really have a hard time. One of the things that I say is that offenses, they, if they're not dealt with, they breed unbelief. So
Mhm.
if I'm offended at somebody, and I'm allowing that to become something that festers, and it becomes something that leads me I'm not forgiving, I'm resenting this person, there's bitterness in my life. Those
Yeah.
things, as we've been saying, they really do tend to spread and expand in our life, to the point that I think that it will eventually come to the conclusion of me blaming God for things that obviously are not his fault, of me like holding things against God, and being unwilling to open my life to him. in a way where I can really experience joy and intimacy and you know, really, yeah, just life with Jesus, right? And so if I'm unwilling to give these things up and to let these things go, then, you know, I think that that's ultimately what that leads to. Is it not just this one person that I have a problem with, but it really
Mhm.
can eventually spill over into so many other areas of my life where now I'm treating other people badly and just doing different things, right? And so that willingness, and I think that, you know, like if you're, you know, day one, you're at this place where you just are making a decision that I'm going to be willing to become willing to forgive. That doesn't sound like this, you know, super high watermark of faith, right? It just
Mhm.
sounds like, God, I'm willing to not fight you openly on this anymore.
Right,
Right?
yeah.
But then it's
I
like the
I
work of the
surrender.
Holy Spirit in my life. I'm inviting the work of the Holy Spirit in my life to bring that change to my heart, because I can't change my heart on my own. The Holy Spirit has to do it. And
Yeah.
so it's, you know what I mean? And so again, I just think what you explained there is really powerful, and it's a really truly practical way to walk freedom out in our lives, where not
Mhm.
from one moment to the next. Like I can make the decision, I can say, God, I choose to forgive this person. But then tomorrow I might wake up and hear that person's name, and then all of a sudden it sets me off again. And it's not like, oh crap, God's mad at me, because it's like, no, let me go back to God again with this and say, God, I made this decision yesterday. I'm going to make this decision again today. And I think it's
Mhm.
like decisions over a period of time that kind of produces that repetition and muscle memory that allows us to get to that point of really, like what you said. I can talk to this person. I can hear this person brought up in a conversation, and there's nothing
Yes.
within me that's twisting and turning because I'm
Yeah.
free.
Yeah, you don't feel that angst and that desire to, get your 2 cents in about their character or whatever.
It's
Um,
good.
I think that, uh, there a few years ago, I read a book. If have you ever read the books by Shauna Nyquist, who is Bill Hybels' daughter? And she wrote Cold Tangerines and Bittersweet, and it's reminds me a little bit
Oh,
of
I
my book. It's
have not read it.
probably
No.
how some of my writing got developed, but it's kind of short little essays. Um, and she talks about, she had one called, I think it was just called On the Hook, and it talked about how when with our forgiving people, our forgiveness, that we have to let people off the hook. We have, and sometimes it's more like a almost a physical or a visualization of taking someone off the hook. And
Mm.
tomorrow they might be on the hook again, and sometimes you have to take them off the hook day after day after day and let them off the hook. And it doesn't make their behavior, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's a misnomer is we think that by forgiving somebody, we're saying their behavior is acceptable. And that's
Right.
not it. We're not
Come on.
saying what you did is okay. We're not saying it's acceptable. We're just saying, I don't want to hold on to this because it's hurting me. I'm doing this really to alleviate what's on my heart. Whether or not they receive your forgiveness or um, know you, that, you know, like I said, most of them aren't thinking about you at all. You're
Mm,
the only one thinking about how much they've done and how bad they are. They're not, it's not infringing on their life whatsoever. You're
yeah.
the one suffering. So you have to let them off the hook so you can stop suffering. You can stop the
Mhm.
bleeding in your own life. Not,
Mhm.
it's not for them, it's for you.
Yeah. And I do think that there are times where God just really does a quick supernatural kind of a work and changes our perspective, you know, and changes our heart on something, and it never bothers you again, you know? But I think that a lot of times, that it is a process to walk out. And however it happens, it's still progress toward experiencing greater freedom, and it should be celebrated, you know, and it
Mhm.
shouldn't be this thing like, oh, like I suck at this, I'm so bad at forget, like come on. Like it's you
Yeah.
do have human emotions that are involved in there, and you have hurts and wounds, and that shouldn't be an excuse to not forgive. But at the same time, I think as much as it becomes necessary to let other people off the hook sometimes, let yourself off the hook sometimes too, and recognize that, like, not off the hook in terms of this is not your responsibility, but off the hook in terms of, stop beating yourself up, like, if you don't do it
Mhm.
right, the first time. Because
Right.
as much as, like maybe you've had years of there is something really powerful about repetition and doing something over and over again. And maybe
Mhm.
you have years of just letting this stuff just infiltrate your mind and your thoughts, and it just, years of responding in a unhealthy way. Again, like, supernaturally, God can do anything and take that away in a moment, but oftentimes it is a process of repetition. One of the things that
Mhm.
I've just seen over and over in my life has been, I can become anxious, worried about things in a moment, and there's certain things
Mhm.
that'll set me off. And one of the things that I am not even I'm not even gonna use the word perfect. I'm not even good at it. I'll just say that. But I've gotten better, right? Like, you talked about narrowing that gap, narrowing the distance, the time that it
Yeah.
takes for me to shift from being worried to, or, shift from doing this to responding to God, on the other hand. Like, those I'm closing the gap, right, with the help of the Holy Spirit. And, but, like, kinda shifting from that place of, like, I can be worried about this, and if I'm worried about something like money, finances, whatever, like, that can lead me to, like, all the pity party type stuff of, "Oh, like, what about
Mhm.
this? And I don't have money for this, and this never works out." Like, or instead of doing all that, I can kinda change the way I respond to that thing, and I can become grateful for what I have, and grateful for what God has
Mhm.
done, and grateful for what God's doing, and grateful for his promises for my future, and you know what I mean? And for me, gratitude and just being
Yeah.
intentionally thankful has been, just like the thing that I can point to probably above anything else that's just helped me to kind of shift my thinking, shift my perspective, to kind of get myself out of, darkness, so to speak. And I think becoming intentionally choosing, it's kind of like intentionally choosing to pray for that person that you feel like you hate right now.
Mhm.
Intentionally choosing to seek their betterment in some way, right? And I find that in my life with all kinds of things, that if I'll just be intentional about being thankful, intentional about just praising God, worshiping God, recognizing an aspect of his character, in the midst of something negatively that's affecting my mind, that very, very quickly, sometimes it takes longer than others, but in relative terms, very, very quickly, I can kind of begin to shift the way that my mind is thinking. And the more that you do that, repetition, the more that you do that, the more you train yourself, the way you train your subconscious mind and everything else to kind of automatically respond
Mhm.
in a good way, as opposed to, in one of these destructive ways.
Yeah, no, I love that because, when you think about right now, everyone kind of talking books and sermons, and everywhere you go, the people are in the world also just talking about how the neural pathways and how we
Yeah.
can
Mhm.
retrain and reroute our thoughts and our negative thinking and retrain
Mhm.
our brains. And that's really, I think, a lot of what it is. It's the Holy Spirit's help, but also what we think about, we bring about kind of thing. So if we're praying every day for somebody to have all the good things in their life that you have in yours, eventually that's going to be a go to strategy when you
Mhm.
start feeling hateful feelings or jealous feelings, comparing other people. I'm in real estate world. I sit on a team with a lot of people selling a lot of houses. It's really hard to not
Mm.
sit there and think, well, she sold 3 houses this weekend. How come I can't sell 3 houses? What's wrong with me? And instead of just being like, good job, I'm so glad you sold 3 houses.
Mm.
Instead of it coming back to, why can't I have what you have? Why didn't I
Yes.
get the blessings that you're getting? Um, which can, you just retrain your brain to respond by doing it over and over and over. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really profound way to view it, is that you do it whether you feel it or not. You pray, you ask for them to have all the good things in their life, even if it's through gritted teeth. And like my
Yes.
friend, I said, she used to say, I celebrate the fact that I don't pray anymore. God, help them go to heaven tonight. Like it used to be, that was
Mm,
the only prayer I could come up with for that person, was help them go to heaven tonight. And I remember her telling me that, because she was telling me to pray for these people, and I was like, oh, well, I don't even pray that. Look at me. I'm doing good. I'm not praying to have them go to heaven tonight.
mm.
I'm a little further down the road than that. And so there was at least a little celebration that that wasn't the prayer I was praying. I well, you're saying something else. I was thinking it could be a whole podcast in and of itself, but probably a lot of these could.
For sure.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's so good. That's so good. That whole thing about celebrating with people,
Mm,
when you don't want to, it's such a big deal because it shifts everything. It just shifts the way that we think. It changes our
mhm,
perspective. You do that enough times, man,
mhm.
because
Well,
it
it's not about you then. It's about it. Get your ego out
yes,
of there. Get your
yes,
I deserve this mentality, and that self-focused, selfish, self-seeking, self-serving mindset. And that's one of the things that I think when you were talking, I thought about Oswald Chambers is an author I read a lot, and in My Utmost for His Highest, he talks about, I think it was even about forgiving people, but that instead of seeing it as something that we do because that we love other people unconditionally, or that we forgive other people, that we don't do it because that's what we've learned to do. We do it because the way Jesus did it and the way God does it is that because it's in our nature to do so.
yeah,
Like if our
it's good.
focus is becoming more like Christ, then it's our nature to forgive. And so it's
Absolutely.
almost easy because we're like, oh yeah, that's just who I am. It has nothing to do with how you've offended me personally as Heather. It's but I'm a Christ follower, and I'm trying to live as much like Jesus as I can, and it's his nature is to forgive. His nature is he's already forgiven you before you've even done it. He's already forgiven
That's
that
right.
thing.
That's right.
And that puts me in a whole different position too. Is that I'm trying to be humble and be react the way Jesus would, and he's already forgiven them before they ask. Um, so I love that. It's in because it's in our nature to do so. And I want
Mm,
that to be my nature. And that's where I need to put my focus. We get caught up in the details of how to do it. I don't think we need to worry so much about the details. We just need to focus on having the nature of God in us. And then those other things just kind of fall into place.
come on. Yeah. So good. That's so good. Yeah, if I've got a big yes for Jesus, then, like,
Mhm.
these other issues that come up as far as, like, "Oh, am I gonna forgive this person?" I don't
Yeah,
have to even think about that because it's
right.
already settled.
And it's not
Cool.
like you can't. I have a real problem with, I have never let my kids say this. Like, I barely let my kids say, so with the word hate, like I feel like as a Christ follower, you cannot hate anybody. You can't use that word, period. And I knew with those people I was bordering on hate, and that really, really bothered me because
Mm,
I'm like, I know for a fact that is not in God's nature to do that.
mhm.
And I mean, I barely let my kids say they hate broccoli. Like, no,
Right.
we don't say
Yeah.
hate. That's like our big thing. We don't say hate. We don't say hate about anything. And because it's that same thing. It's like that's not an option. You can't hate somebody. Jesus would never hate anybody. Jesus would never not forgive anybody. It's a non-negotiable. It's not, like I said, it's not a if or can't or how long. It's just when are you, or how maybe are you going to get to the place where you can do this. And sometimes it's just choosing to do it and then waiting, for the feelings to catch up,
Mm.
because they probably will if you continue to do it, but they might not be there right away.
Yeah. Yeah. Heather Carter, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate your time, Heather. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It was so good and really edifying for me personally. And appreciate it. If you could point people before we wrap up here to where they can find your books, your website, anywhere that that you'd like to mention there.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, my website is heathercarterwrites.com. And that's probably the best place to go because you can order my books through that. You can preview some of the blog posts. There's about 4 or 5, it's a lot of big difference, 400 or 500-ish blogs on there. And probably 300 of them are encapsulated in my first book and my second book. And then there's another stray 100 or so blogs that aren't in a book yet. So the thing I love about my website, the way my gal designed it, is that I categorize all the posts that I write. And so if you go and scroll down, first of all, you can sign up so that any new ones come to you in an email. If you're not a big get on Facebook or Instagram kind of thing. But all the blogs are categorized. So if you are struggling on a particular day with forgiveness, there's ones in there there's forgiveness, resentment, turbo resentments, all that good stuff. But you can go to those categories, and then everything I've ever written, which is a lot in those categories, is you can read in 10 different posts. So I think it's helpful, if you're struggling with control or comparison, worry, fear, surrender, all that good stuff. You can just go click on that category and then read everything I've ever written about those topics. So
that's super helpful.
Yeah. And then, I actually have started doing this is kind of a new thing. They're called Soul Selfie soirees. And it's typically designed for women, probably at churches or other kinds of venues, but they're like an interactive, like 3-hour conference, if you will. So I speak for maybe 40 minutes, but then we break up and then we read. It's kind of like a book club in a large setting. So I read a blog post, and then each table discusses it around the group, and then I read another one, and then there's discussion. But I've done a couple of them, and it's actually pretty cool because you'd be surprised how many people will share if they're simply given a turn. Because the way we do it is everyone has a turn. And, if you don't give people a turn, big mouth people like me talk the whole time, and people who are quieter don't talk or don't share. So we cut to the chase with topics like resentment or comparison, and people have some pretty intense feelings about those things. If you know of anybody who's wanting to do something like that, I'm just launching those. So I have a few on my calendar, but and it's also 3 hours. So it's not like a whole day, whereas I think anymore it's too hard to get someone to commit to a whole day of anything.
Sure.
So it could be like a Friday night, Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon kind of thing. So I'm excited about doing some of those this next year. So.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. That's super cool. Well, yeah, thank you again, Heather, for your time. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to check out this episode. I pray that it blessed you, challenged you, encouraged you, made you think, or something like that. If it did, if you would consider, if you're listening to this on one of the podcast platforms, subscribing, sharing, or leaving a review, that would be amazing. Appreciate you guys so much. And again, Heather, I feel like I could keep talking to you like all day.
I know we're just getting started. We got
deeper. But yeah, we'll definitely do it again for sure.